be the last lecture in the series for Chapter 14. We're beginning here with the focus question that is starting us on the path of the Confederacy and how the war affects not only the government, but the citizenry and those that are fighting on that side of our war. So, yes, let me see here. There we go. All right, so Jefferson Davis, while he was initially born in Kentucky and moved to Mississippi, where he begins a large plantation on an island that is between Mississippi and Louisiana in the Mississippi River, just off of Vicksburg. He was known as the Cicero of the Senate because he was such an eloquent public speaker. So obviously I am not following in those footsteps. He was a cold person. People weren't, he was a difficult person to kind of like warm up to. And many people who met him didn't trust him as far as they could throw him. He was married once, and his first wife dies of, I believe, yellow fever. It was either yellow fever or malaria, something like that. And then he remarries a woman named Varina Davis. And there are all kinds of, apocryphal, that's how you say it, apocryphal stories about Varina. It is true that she did not want him to take the position of president of the Confederacy. They were married in Natchez at one of the homes down there. And let me think there's also rumors that Varina was part African, like she had some sort of African ancestry. And if you look at pictures of her, she's dark complected, but at the same time, so am I. And, if you look at my DNA, I'm as white comes. So I think people just really, I think this is another one of those situations where people want to make the story a little bit juicier than it actually is. So this is our First Lady and President of the Confederacy. Again, he was not someone that connected with people. He was not an easy person to get to know. He was not warm and fuzzy. He didn't have the common touch the way Abraham Lincoln did. And this holds him back in making a successful war effort. He graduated from West Point. He was a senator. He had no charisma, which is weird because if you're the Cicero of the Senate, one would think you would have to have some sort of charisma, but that is neither here nor there. There is no party system in the Confederacy. So, Washington kind of warns against this two-party system way back at his farewell speech. And everybody kind of was like, oh, yes, that's true. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then they immediately, acted like they had no idea that this was a thing. And at first, it seems like it is going to harm the nation, this two-party system, because you can't get people to cooperate and work together. But as our parties develop and become something more than just the political group of people, and it actually has some money behind it, this way your campaigns can be run. You have a political party machine that looks at other candidates of your same political affiliation and says, look, I know you don't agree with what this person says, but if you want to get something done that you really want done, we're going to make you agree with him, or we're not going to support the things that you want to get done. So it's kind of like the heavy behind, the face. Under Jefferson Davis, the South's government becomes more centralized than most probably wanted it to be. But when you are trying to fight a war, you can't leave it down to committee. It doesn't work that way. You have Davis trying to raise armies. He is taking control of these railroads. He's building factories. So, these things do get going. However, had he had a lot more time, I think there would have been a bit more success with his, railroad and factory building, or, if maybe he'd have been able to steal them from the Union first, if the Union had been able to like build them first, and then he was like, oh, they're mine now. The problem, one of the hugest of problems with Davis is that he is never able to really make use of the cotton crop, of the economic hegemony that the South had over cotton prices. And it was originally kind of thought of as a way to get Great Britain and France in on on the Confederate side in the war. I'm sorry, the words were all there, they just were not coming out in the right order. And I do apologize for how many times I say the more I do it, the more conscious I am of it, and I really wish I could stop, and I can't. Like it's I sit there and I say it and then immediately go, this is irritating. So there are multiple, Great Britain sent, I believe they sent military people and journalists to kind of get embedded with the Confederate forces. So there was an interest there on the part of the British public. The French had unofficial ambassadors, and I believe I told you one of my great uncles was the dirtbag who was that. So that's great. It's not, but it is what it is. He failed, so there we are. That's good. There it is again. God bless it. The Confederacy pushes this policy of food production early in the war rather than cotton production. So, yes, you need food, obviously. The wheat is mostly coming from the north. So, we don't grow wheat down here, really. I guess we do somewhat. I have no idea about farming, so we'll just leave that there. Let that lie. And they need food. And so Jefferson Davis really encourages growing food products rather than cotton. In fact, there's even an embargo on, you're not allowed to ship cotton out of the South. So this is pushed very hard. He was hoping that economic self-sufficiency would also kind of show these foreign powers, look, we can stand on our own 2 feet as a reputable, foreign power. We can do this. People are not going to put their hand in on something that seems like it's going to fail anyway. That's ridiculous. And while most people are pretty stupid, you don't get to the height of politics by being an idiot. Unfortunately, our King Cotton diplomacy is not very effective. The other, let me back up a little bit. Back in 59 and 60, there were very large cotton crops that year. It was a great year for cotton, and we have a stockpile in our English warehouses. So because of this, they're not in need immediately. And Britain decides that they need more. They need blah, blah, blah. Okay. They need northern wheat. There we go. Just as much, if not more so, than they need southern cotton, because we have a stockpile already. We can hang on to it for a little bit. Also, Britain recognizes, wait a minute, if we stay too dependent on American cotton and say something comes through and just wipes out cotton crops, that's going to ruin us. So what they do is go to, their other colonies in Egypt and India, and they start growing cotton themselves. Russia, the textbook mentions, does this in Central Asia too. And so they are able to stay in business, self-sufficient with their cotton, and this ultimately means a doomed cotton industry in America post-war, because now, since we have more places growing cotton prices go down. It's simple economics. Social change and internal fighting consumes the South. White Southerners are widely supportive of the Confederate cause because they have this idea that the war is being fought to protect them against Northern tyranny. Don't come to my house and tell me what to do, basically. However, once we institute this draft, Davis does so as well. It seems completely counterintuitive to the way he runs his ship, for lack of a better way to put it, and he realizes, though, that without a draft, you're not going to get the men signing up that they need. So by instituting this draft, a lot of people get angry about that because this is pretty much the opposite of small government and, local authority. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, also with this draft, this is a big point. Just like the North, they had it so that rich men could either pay a fine and not have to not have to go in the draft, or they could send a substitute in their place. You also have this thing. The book calls it something specific. Oh, okay. It's called the quote 20 Negro end quote provision. And because of this, it exempts one white male for every 20 slaves on a plantation. And we're going to take advantage of this as much as possible if we are enslavers. So this keeps planters and their sons and overseers all out of the draft. This leaves us with poor farmers who may not have been slaveholding at all. For all we know, they were against slavery. They just didn't want the North telling them what to do. But this leaves them there to be drafted. And it's those people, too, who are living lives where they, most especially, can't afford to be drafted. Their farms and their families will not survive without them. This made a lot of yeoman farmers think that this was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. And it's really easy to declare war and to send people to war when you're not the one who's going to lose anything in it. This is some of our Confederate money. Let's see. You have an enslaved person pictured here. We have, let me see, this is a $10 note of the Eastern Bank of Alabama. You can see our lovely Southern woman. This is the example of what women are and what they should be. We have this $5 note from the state of Alabama. We have enslaved people here. We have our white overseer. And this is our lovely Torch of Liberty. So that's a bit of a paradox or a contradiction. Not a paradox, but definitely a contradiction. And as you can see, this is Eastern Bank of Alabama. This is the state of Alabama. There is no standardization. That's crazy. This doesn't work with money. I don't know why they thought that was going to be a thing. One of my favorite jokes of all time is on the television show 30 Rock. And he's at, the guy played by Alec Baldwin is asking the guy who voiced Wreck-It Ralph how much money he has in savings. And the guy who plays Wreck-It Ralph, he's got this thick Southern accent. He's from Georgia. And he says, "I've got $1,500. And the other guy goes, "Not in Confederate money." He goes, "I have $5, which I don't know. I always think of that, though, whenever I see Confederate money. You're all probably rolling your eyes and going, just get to it. This is so boring. All right. Economic deprivation will always make people angry at what is causing it. The this economic crisis is making Southerners pretty tired of this war. The blockade becomes more effective. More of the South is occupied by Southern forces. Slave productivity declines. Shortages increase. And essential goods aren't available to your consumers. Confederate policies seem to favor the wealthy and large plantation owners with many enslaved people on their plantations. Let me see, make sure I'm not missing things. I have my textbook open too. Yes, many people who were not slaveholders felt like they were shouldering an unfair piece of the war burden. Like our Union, the Confederacy is borrowing heavily to finance their war, but the planters who dominate this Congress are not going to levy taxes because they don't want to have to pay them. Shocking. Instead, it just prints a lot of money, even more than the paper money printed by the Union. Congress authorizes military officers to seize civilian goods and pay the citizens in this money to support the army. So I really like this quote that the textbook includes. It says, the rebel army treated us a heap worse than Union General William T. Sherman did, a Georgia farmer recalls. I had hogs and a mule and a horse, and they took them all. So, yes, that's not good. Numerous small farming families, what are called Yeoman Farmers, they went to war to try to preserve economic independence. Basically, I may not be a slaveholder, but you don't need to be able to tell me what to do with my own money and my own. So they end up going into debt and sinking into poverty during the war. In some cities, food riots break out. By the end of the war, about 100,000 men, mostly poor non-slaveholders, desert from the Confederate Army. We have bread riots in places like Mobile and I believe Richmond. And women just get fed up with it. And, if you ever really want to find a group of people willing to just go really hard on anybody and take them down, find a bunch of women who are hangry, and there you are. Let's see. And then this paragraph in the textbook I really like. It's on page 570. It says, in 1862, Joshua B. Moore, a slaveholder in northern Alabama, commented on how slavery threatened the Confederate war effort. Men who have no interest in it, he wrote, are not going to fight through a long war to save it. Never. They will tire of it and quit. As the war progressed, desertion became what one officer called a crying evil for Southern armies. Most of the men who ended up deserting were almost entirely from the poorest class of non-slaveholders whose labor is indispensable to the daily support of their families. Men, another official noted, cannot be expected to fight for the government that permits their wives and children to starve. So I think that is the best summation of what we're looking at here in the South, why the war effort is not going as well for them as it's going in the North. And a big portion of this, too, is a population difference. When you have fewer people, you have fewer people able to absorb the burden. And so as each person is having to shoulder more and more, they're not going to want to be on board with this, with something that they see as not a fight for themselves. So this is our bread riot in Mobile. I don't really know what to say about that other than look at this woman. She's like open-handed. She's smacking him on the butt. And this guy's like praying, being like, please don't kill me. And she's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it with my bare hands. Okay. More than in our North, the war gives many costs or I guess women have to end up paying many of the costs in the South. They're left alone on their farms and plantations. They have to take over men's responsibilities. They're conducting business. They're disciplining their enslaved people. These are jobs that they were not trained for. They never expected to have to do, but here we are. Just like in the North, Southern women are able to organize. Hold on, wait. I think, did I skip? Yeah, I skipped the part about Southern Unionists. Let me back up a little bit. Our Southern Unionists, let's see, a lot of them are imprisoned by the Confederate military. Some of them are executed. Good job there. There are secret societies that have these Southern Unionist groups it's very similar, in my opinion, to like the Sons of Liberty in the Revolution. These were called the Heroes of America, and they're kind of this low-key group going around and sabotaging and, sowing the seeds of rebellion against the Confederacy. So it's kind of like, oh, wow, look. Your farm's failing, huh? Wouldn't it be great if, all your sons hadn't died in those battles that these rich people sent them to? Southerners who were loyal to the Union made a huge contribution to the Union war effort. About 50,000 white Southerners fought with the Union. This is one of my very favorite stories of all time, and I'm really glad that the textbook included it at the top of 571. There's a woman named Elizabeth Van Lew. She lived in Richmond, Virginia, and after her father dies in 1843, she convinces her mother to emancipate, or I guess grant manumission to the family's enslaved people. During the war, she visits a Confederate prison in Richmond. It's called Libby Prison. And she brings supplies to the Union prisoners there. And she also ends up helping some of them escape. And funny enough, one of the formerly enslaved people that she had a pivotal role in making, in convincing her mother to manumit, ends up working as a servant in the Southern White House. And this woman, a woman named Mary Elizabeth Bowser, she passes secrets and information about the Confederacy to Union forces. So good for you, Miss Bowser. And also Ms. Lew, or Van Lew, that's her name. All right, so now we've covered that. I can't believe I forgot that story. I love that story. So with our women in the South, like I was saying, women end up shouldering a lot of the burden. Just like in the North, there are government girls who staff a lot of the Confederate bureaucracy. There is a woman named Rose Greenhow. She's the widow of a former American diplomat. She heads up an espionage ring in Washington, D.C., that passes information about Union troop movements to the Confederacy. She's even arrested and put in jail. While she's doing that, she manages to smuggle out intelligence until finally the Union is like, look, you are just too much of a problem. You go to Richmond. We're tired of you. We're not even going to keep you in jail anymore. Just go away. So, I think I like that one too, even though she is a Confederate spy. But still, it's pretty bad. Some word I can't say because I'm a teacher. There's this legacy or legend of how Southern women were so devoted and they were so self-sacrificing. And I mean, I'm not going to discount the suffering that a lot of these women did suffer during the war, a lot of these, shortages and watching their sons die and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, it's very difficult to praise someone for sacrifice when they didn't have a choice. It's not like they could suddenly say, no, you know what, I think we're just not going to do this. That wasn't an option for many of these women. They did what they had to do. Many of them didn't choose secession, and many of them had no choice into when the war ended. So to overly praise someone for self-sacrifice when the sacrifice was not their choice to begin with, they were just forced to do so, seems a little overbearing. But, No one asks me ever anything. One thing that a lot of these Southern women were able to do is kind of sow the seeds of discontent amongst their male relatives who were fighting. When you have your wife at home and, she's got your children, your very young children, you're on a farm, and she writes to you and she's like, look, our crop's not going to be able to come in because you're not here to help harvest it. The twins are sick. Pretty sure that Bobby's going to die. I'm here by myself, and Union raiders and Confederate raiders are coming through all the time. I have been beaten up and worse many times. So it'd be great if you'd come home. That dude is probably 9 times out of 10 going to drop that gun. Or no, he'd take it with him. He'd go home because it was his gun. It's really difficult to convince a citizen fighting force to remain committed to something that they don't have an interest in. If they are not enslavers themselves, why are they going to continue to vote or continue to fight to keep slavery alive? They're not going to do that. So these women are encouraging desertion from the army. Good for them. So, all right, here's one of the things that really, really, really is it sticks in my craw. Because I have idiot cousins who want to argue this with me and give me memes instead of actual real evidence. So good job with that. There were not black soldiers for the Confederacy. The end. There's none. At the end of the war, the Confederacy finally authorizes the ability to recruit black people or black men to fight in the war, but the war was over by the time any kind of recruitment efforts started. Now, soldiers did take their enslaved people with them to fight. However, they were fighting, they were with them as enslaved people. They weren't armed. Many times they were just kind of abandoned on the battlefield. Like, it's really, if you read some of it, I have this book that just will make you so angry. So I'm not going to make you read it, but it's really good. And it puts, it just, it immolates anyone's arguments about black soldiers for the Confederacy. As the book quotes a man named Howell Cobb, a Georgia planter and politician, "The day you make soldiers out of them is the beginning of the end of the revolution. If slaves make good soldiers, our whole theory of slavery is wrong." Couldn't put it better myself. So we're just going to go on from that one. This is a painting. It was painted in 1864 by a Virginia artist named William D. Washington. This is, it depicts a common wartime scene. There's a deceased Confederate cavalry officer, William Latane, I think that's how you say it. Women, children, enslaved people they're doing everything at home, even digging the grave. So this kind of shows the situation that people left at home are dealing with. All right, we have another focus question. Let me see, how many more slides do we have? Okay, so not too many. Dang it, where am I? I lost it. Oh, here we go. Okay. Military and political turning points of the war. Aha, this is where I come in. Okay, this is one of my favorite parts. So, slavery is starting to fall apart in the South. You have the Union soldiers coming through. You have enslaved people deserting. Who's going to go out and capture them? These women in their fun little skirts and their terribly unflattering hairstyles? No, they are too busy caring for other things on the plantation. You even have Union soldiers in Louisiana encouraging formerly enslaved people to sabotage plantations. And there is, I cannot remember where I found this piece of writing, but it talks about how these formerly enslaved people are heading into Louisiana and they're ready to just F some stuff up. It's pretty great. So the war's outcome, however, is still uncertain in 63 and 64. The Southern everyday people are, they're kind of starting to check out here. In April of 1863, we have a new Union commander. Yay! Hooker. He is the new commander of the Army of the East for the Union, and he ends up invading central Virginia. Lee is outnumbered 2-1, and he still defeats Hooker at Chancellorsville. However, at Chancellorsville, this is when my favorite person, Stonewall Jackson, is killed by friendly fire. I love it. I think it's just like that is the cherry on top of the Stonewall Jackson Sunday. Lee decides he is going to invade the North. He's like, you know what? We're going to do this, and something's going to happen. We're not really sure why he did it. There doesn't really seem to be a strategic, there's not a clear strategic advantage on why he did this. Maybe he was doing morale. Maybe, I don't know. So the northernmost battle of the Civil War, as long as you don't include the Battle of Schrute Farms, was the Battle of Gettysburg. It happens on the first 3 days in the month of July. The Union forces are now under the command of General George Meade. It is the largest battle ever fought in North America. 165,000 troops fought there. Lee finds himself doing something that he really had not done at this point in the war yet, which is he comes upon entrenched Union soldiers. Fun story, the reason why the Battle of Gettysburg happened in Gettysburg is because a group of Confederates heard that there was a shipment of shoes coming into the area, and so they go off to try to, take them because they need shoes. Their feet are hurting. Many of them had already marched through the shoes that they started in. Many of them didn't have shoes. So they go to find these shoes, and on the way, they kind of stumble upon some Union scouts, which the Union scouts went right back and said, hey, there's some Confederates coming our way. And the Confederates went, whoops. But that's how life is. It's pretty weird. So Lee comes upon some entrenched soldiers, and they fight for 2 days. He's unable to get the Union line to break. So George Pickett, Major General George Pickett, is sent with his troops to have a frontal assault. This is what is known as Pickett's Charge. It was a suicide mission. When this charge was ordered, everyone knew it was going to end up poorly, and most of the men who did it, who ordered the charge, were heartbroken to do so. His division marches across an open field toward the Union forces. They are met with artillery and rifle fire, and most of these soldiers die and never make it to the Union lines. Of the 14,000 men who made the march, fewer than half returned. This is sometimes called the high tide of the Confederacy, and this is one of Lee's most this is one of his biggest regrets of his life, was this charge. It's also one of the biggest mistakes. His army ends up retreating into Virginia, and they never get back on northern soil again. So one of the few blunders that Lee did militarily, and it was a bad one. So I guess go big or go home, and he couldn't go home because they had taken his plantation. Sorry. That's a little Civil War joke for your nerds out there. God, I'm such a loser. All right. At the same time as Gettysburg is happening, there is a siege ongoing in Vicksburg. It's been going on for a year. Pemberton is the leader of the Confederate forces here, and we are in super siege territory. Like, it went on for a really long time. It was bad. They ended up eating like dogs and rats. They dig into the hills around Vicksburg. So eventually, though, on July 4th, 1863, the Vicksburg surrenders, and John Pemberton's army of 30,000 men surrender. That's a lot of people. And, you know, once this army, I don't remember if I taught y'all this, but once one of these particular armies surrenders, they're out of the game. They don't get to shoot anymore. The Confederacy can't really afford to lose 30,000 men. I mean, they literally cannot afford to lose it. And they do. They lose it at Vicksburg. Grant is our Union commander at Vicksburg. He's the one who laid the siege. After they capture Vicksburg, he marches to Jackson, burns it to the ground. That's why it has the nickname of Chimneyville. Fortification Street down there by Belhaven, literally, that's why it's called that. It was the line of fortifications around the city of Jackson. Once Vicksburg surrenders, that's it. The Union has the entire Mississippi Valley, and these are two defeats at once for our Confederacy. Ironically, it happens around Independence Day, and for both of them. And for many, 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 many years, I would say probably about 100 years, Vicksburg did not celebrate the 4th of July. They used it as a day of mourning because why not? Okay, this is a map. These are our Union victories. We were up here at Gettysburg, and then we're down here at Vicksburg. This is Lee. Look at that dude. He's, I don't know, spiffy looking. And then there's this guy, who I would much rather hang out with because he looks like more fun. All right, about 2 years pass, and Grant is given charge of the Union forces. This is because of a few things. Grant is recognized as a commander willing to accept high numbers of casualties in order to win. He starts a war of attrition. A war of attrition is nothing more than simply refusing to let your enemy recover. If they retreat, you follow. If there are no timeouts, there's nothing. He's willing to get these high number of casualties because he knows that the North can replenish their armies, whereas the Confederates cannot. This is a simple mathematics thing. They can hold out longer. And when you're fighting and you want victory, that's really the advantage that you need to have. In May of 1864, Grant's Army of the Potomac begins a month of fierce fighting. I believe this is the Wilderness Campaign. And after 6 weeks, Grant loses 60,000 men, but he inflicts 30,000 casualties on Lee's army that they definitely could. Again, they could not afford this. That was the size of Pemberton's entire army in Vicksburg. And he kills that many people within 6 weeks of fighting in the, I think it's the Wilderness Campaign. Yeah, it's yes, because it says so in the textbook. It says it was as though Christian men had turned to fiends, and hell itself had usurped the place of earth. And that beautiful language is true. This sustained fighting was a turning point in modern warfare. And it really had more in common with modern trench warfare than it did with, like modern trench warfare, blah, blah, blah. Modern trench warfare that we see in World War I, rather than what we had seen before that, like in 1861. Like that's just how that is. Grant maintains his initiative, but the public refer to him as a butcher. Busher tends to be like the name they give a lot of successful military people. So what does this tell you? You have to be willing to sacrifice men to win a war. Grant fails to capture Petersburg, that controls the railways to Richmond, and he falls back on his fun siege tactics. It finally paid off in Vicksburg. Why shouldn't it pay off here? At this exact same time, Sherman has marched through North and South Carolina. He is a protege of Grant, and Sherman is going to make sure that no one that he comes across is able to recover from anything. He burns everything. His army lives off the land. They turned the railroads into what are called Sherman neckties. They bent the metal so that the railroads couldn't run. They did their job and then some. He marches through Georgia. They take Atlanta in September of 1864. The North, even through this kind of success with the War of Attrition, the Union is questioning if this is how far they want to go. There are lots of casualties. I'm sorry, I lost my place in my notes. We are about to have a re-election in 1864 of Lincoln. And with all of these casualties, Northern morale is very low. Lincoln is 100% thinking that he might lose the presidential election in a few months. Radical Republicans are nominating, remember, these are the people that are like super, I don't want to say crazy because like they knew what they wanted to do, but just very much more radical. Well, yeah, because they're radical Republicans, duh. They're more farther out there than your Republicans represented by Lincoln. They nominate John C. Fremont. He made his name in California doing that kind of stuff. And then the Democrats nominate our old friend, General George B. McClellan. He ran on a platform of calling for immediate ceasefire and peace conference. Had you been fighting for 4 years, had you lost numerous relatives and made sacrifices heretofore unknown to your family, would you be willing to vote for a man who's calling for an immediate ceasefire? Probably not. Many Northerners kind of were like, I don't think so. And in the end, Fremont ends up withdrawing from the election. Sherman captures Atlanta, like I had already said, and Lincoln wins this election. He captures every state that votes, except for Kentucky, Delaware, and New Jersey. This means that the North has committed itself to fighting this war until we're done. Let us crush the rebels and remake our country. This is Pennsylvania Soldiers Voting, and from Harper's Weekly. All right, Rehearsals for Reconstruction. We're getting there, y'all. The Sea Islands Experiment. Okay, the federal authorities were trying to supervise a transition from slavery to freedom as the war is starting to come to an, or it seems as if it's starting to come to an end, and more southern territory is falling under Union control. As you know, the Emancipation Proclamation frees enslaved individuals in the states in rebellion, and as the Union Army moves south, they can put this into effect. So what do? How do we rehabilitate these people? How do we get them to become Americans with the limitations that their enslavers had placed upon them? Lack of education, lack of autonomy, lack of understanding how the world works. Conflict over access to land, the control over this labor and political power structures take place in South Carolina, Louisiana, other parts of the South as the Union is moving through the Confederacy. And this calls for some early Reconstruction efforts. We have to have a plan. Let's see if we can figure one out that works. One of the best known of these rehearsals is an experiment on the Sea Islands off of the North Carolina coast. So in late 1861, the Union Navy is occupying these islands, and all the white people that were there pieced out and left 10,000 enslaved individuals there. Northern Army officers who were cotton plantation investors, and along with some black and white reformers, came to kind of use this as a let's see what we can do here to, if we can do this here, then perhaps we can enrich and help these people throughout the rest of the South. There was a teacher named Charlotte Fortin. We actually read that selection from her diary where she talks about how, the white girls that she's in school with, they talk to her at school, but then they don't want to be seen talking to her on the street. She goes down, and a woman named Laura M. Town, who was actually a white woman, both of them go to teach the formerly enslaved everything. They're teachers. They go to start schools. And Miss Town actually ends up staying in the South for the rest of her life and working with these communities. What is this? Okay, so this thing with the Gideonites. I skipped that, I think. Oh, okay, so the Gideonites are the black and white reformers. That's what they were called. They were called Gideon's Band. I don't think you're going to have to know that. I'm not going to ask you about it. I doubt the AP test will, but who knows. Okay, so the enslaved individuals' most basic demand was for land. They want to farm it. They want to, be their own people. Some northern people believed that free labor for the formerly enslaved should take the form of wage work. So basically, let's just pay them for their labor. Let's not give them land and, give them autonomy. We'll just pay them for the work they were doing before, and we'll let white people stay in charge. The land is sold by the federal government that was out there on the Sea Islands. It mostly goes to northern investors who want to show the advantages of, labor given by free people. They're also wanting to make a profit. By 1865, our Sea Island black families are working for money. They're getting educated. They're enjoying more material objects, more, basically living to a higher standard than they were under slavery. And the experiment, it's considered widely successful, but we also have this question of, should the formerly enslaved be able to be landowners? They've been working this land their entire lives. Why shouldn't they be given land? It's the least we could do, I feel. A different experiment is happening in Louisiana and in Mississippi. After the Battle of Vicksburg, after Vicksburg falls, Union authorities try to kind of reestablish the cotton plantations under wage labor, but the formerly enslaved were forced to sign contracts with the former enslavers. So they would be paid, they would be given an education, they were free from physical punishment, their families were safe, they weren't going to be broken up, but neither side liked this. The black people were like, look, we don't want to work for these people. They treated us terribly. Why do we have to do that? And the planters were complaining of an insubordinate workforce. Well, yeah, you enslaved them for generations. What do you think? I don't know. Some people like to complain about the obvious. Only occasionally do we have Army officers wanting to have a different way to do freedom. Grant actually takes Davis Bend, which was Jefferson Davis's plantation, and instead of
being forced into a contract with, the president of the rebelling states. The land is divided among the now emancipated, formerly enslaved there, and there's like a government put in place where the formerly enslaved are electing their own judges, their own sheriffs. I think it's a really cool system. I'd never heard of it really until I started studying this, and I think it was great. It was called a, quote, Negro paradise, end quote. So I think that's a really cool system, and too bad it couldn't have worked other places. So this is a political cartoon. We have George McClellan here. He's trying to get peace Democrats and war Democrats to unite together, and he's unsuccessful. This is a school for freed people on St. Helena Island in South Carolina. This is one of those coastal islands. All right. The future political status of African Americans becomes a central point of debate as our war is continuing. Events in the Union occupied territory in Louisiana focused everyone on this question: what is this political establishment? What's going to happen here for our formerly enslaved people? Keep in mind, a lot of people in the North still did not see African Americans equal to white Americans. So how do we do this? Do we have a second class of citizenry in the United States formally, or not? Lincoln hopes to establish a civilian government, and he in Louisiana, I'm sorry, I didn't specify, and he announces a 10% plan. Lincoln kind of always had this idea that we do not need to punish the South any more than it has been punished through war. Many of these people, he kind of recognized a lot of the people that would end up hurt the most were people that didn't want to go to war in the first place or weren't going to be able to get anything out of the war at all. So he had this very clear idea of amnesty. He kind of sets this out in his second inaugural address that we covered. Under this 10% plan, it offers full amnesty and restoration of rights, including property, except for the formerly enslaved. And this is going to almost all white Southerners who swear loyalty to the Union and swear to support emancipation. So you can have everything back except for your enslaved individuals, obviously, because that is not something that exists anymore. And the only things you have to do is swear loyalty to the Union and support emancipation. When 10% of these voters, 10% of the voters who voted in 1860, so you got to go all the way back and say, okay, who voted in 1860? These are the people we're looking for. These are the people that we know are necessary to swear this oath. Once 10% of those people swear these oaths, they're allowed to elect a new state government, and the state's government's first active business has to be abolishing slavery. Lincoln doesn't offer a role for the formerly enslaved, but he hopes that this plan would appeal to white Southerners so that the war would end quicker. Lincoln is a middle way man, very much so. He wants to end this war. That's what he wants to do the most. And at this point, short of surrendering, he's going to do anything he can think of to end it. Our free blacks in New Orleans. Now, if you ever study pre-Civil War African American society in New Orleans, it is fascinating. Keep in mind, remember, we've had Spanish, we had French, we had English. So all of these different cultures influence the racial dynamics in New Orleans. And you had powerful mixed race individuals, and you had this just whole society that flourishes for African American people and people with African American ancestry. It's really cool if you're, into that kind of thing. I highly recommend looking into it. Free blacks in New Orleans use the fact that the Union is there pretty early to push for civil, legal, and political equality. And our radical Republicans in Congress, they're like, we are on board with you. We think that's a great idea. In 1864, radical Republicans end up passing something called the Wade-Davis Bill. They do not like Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. They're like, this seems a little too nicey nice. So they passed the Wade-Davis Bill. This bill requires a majority, not just 1/10, of white Southern males to pledge loyalty to the Union before Reconstruction begins in any state, and it gives black people legal equality, although it does not allow them to vote. That's not something that they do. Your textbook says that Lincoln vetoes the bill. That is technically incorrect. He doesn't veto the bill. He does what's called a pocket veto, which the legislation had to be signed by the end of that year, and Lincoln just leaves it on his desk. He doesn't veto it. He also doesn't sign it into law. So it's not a formal veto. Had it been a formal veto and it went back to Congress, they could have enacted it. They could have voted to overrule his veto. So I think that's a pretty large distinction that needs to be made there. It was not a veto. It was a pocket veto, which is an informal, I'm just not going to do anything about this and let this legislation expire. So as our war is ending, we have no plan for Reconstruction. We got a whole lot of plans and no formal plan. All right. Sherman starts to march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah in November of 1864. He destroys railroads, buildings, food, supplies, anything in his path so that any Confederate troops, so that they cannot use it. Sherman, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to put this. Sherman, in doing this is a pretty, advanced way of thinking. It was very controversial during the war. People were pissed. But it was successful, yes. I kind of think that, at that point, they were doing what they needed to do. And Sherman said, we're just going to burn it to the ground. He continues up into South Carolina, and when they loop back up and go into South Carolina and stuff, they just go wild. To a point, the destruction is a little bit more controlled in Georgia, but by the time they reach South Carolina, these men are pissed, and they end up just ruining everything. On January 31st of 1865, Congress approves the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery throughout the entire Union. 1865, January 31st. It's a big year. In Lincoln's second inaugural in March of 65, Lincoln calls for reconciliation. It's possibly one of the greatest American speeches of all time, and I will die on that hill. April 2nd, Grant finally gets through Lee's lines at Petersburg. This makes Lee retreat, and Grant is right on his tail. They abandon Richmond, the Confederates do. This is a big deal. The capital has fallen. Northern troops invade Richmond. They occupy it the next day. On the 4th of April, Lincoln takes a train down to Richmond, and he is walking through the streets. He has only about a dozen soldiers accompanying him. He's like, look, I don't care. These people, if they want to kill me, they can kill me, but I'm going to go and see what we have going on here on the ground. Formerly enslaved people are falling to their knees in thanks to Lincoln for seeing this through, for making sure that they are treated, or at least that their futures are just as valuable to him as the futures of any American. Lee and his army, they try to head west. Grant's army splits up and surrounds them. Lee finally is forced to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April 9th of 1865. 5 days later, Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. by the actor John Wilkes Booth. It was devastating for the country. This is the first assassination of American presidents. There are only 4 in our entire history, and the country is just, I don't even know how to explain the devastation that is wrought by Lincoln's death. It's also a scary moment for the country. The war is over. We have to somehow unite our country. And the man who has steered us through this, who seemed to be one of the, I would argue, probably the smartest president we ever had, he is dead. Scary times. Lincoln's body is transported to Springfield, Illinois, by rail, and mourners are lined up on the train route to pay their respects, to view the president's body as he's laid in state. And he is finally buried a month after he walked into Richmond on May 4th, 1865. This is our late Civil War. This is Sherman marching down to Savannah. Again, Whore of the South. She is not burned. And then he and his troops march up into South Carolina. This is William T. Sherman. He is the famous, he gives the famous quote, "War is hell." And this is kind of the, I don't know, this seems superfluous to me. How this, where we've sat in the world. Grant is looked at post-war as a nation builder. I don't know about that. I think that gives him a little too much credit. He was a good general, absolutely. But nation builder, I'm not sure about that. The Civil War, though, it is our touchstone of modernization. It preserves the Union. It destroys slavery. It shifts power from the South to the North, and from slaveholding planters to Northern capitalists. The money is shifted, especially. It expands the power of the federal government. It helps the North modernize its economy. It very obviously defines what freedom is for African Americans. It turns our country from the independent farmer, small shop owner, artisan into an industrialized nation. The Founding Fathers would not have recognized the country post-Civil War. Frederick Douglass says, work does not end with the abolition of slavery, it only begins. And I think that's the best words to end this lecture on.